Have you ever wondered why the world seems broken?
I hope everyone had a nice break, and welcome back to the end of the world.
Why suffering seems woven into every corner?
Gasoline goes up like a rocket and comes down with a parachute.
Why a reality built on pain, anxiety, poverty, and despair feels like a feature rather than a bug that needs patching out. We're told that's just life, corruption is normal, misery is unavoidable. But when the world is ruled by people who seem hollow, arrogant, and completely severed from anything sacred, you begin to question what's actually going on here. Is it all misfortune, just a bit of bad luck, or are the hard times coded in by design? In 1945, we found something in the desert, buried beneath centuries of suppression, a creation story so dangerous, so disruptive that it had to be hidden. A story forbidden, condemned, and nearly erased by the Roman Orthodox Church. A story that says this world is not what it seems, and that the truth of who we are has been kept in the dark. Would you want to hear it? In the beginning, there was no beginning. No time, no stars, no heaven, no earth, no light passing through the emptiness of space because there was no darkness yet to break. Completely outside of human comprehension, there was only the source. In Gnostic tradition, one of the names given to that source is the monad, the one. I'm going to have a difficult time trying to describe something that is indescribable. It's not a god in the human sense. It doesn't sit upon a throne like a king. It isn't a being with a face, voice, or temper. It's described as something beyond shape, language, and comprehension itself, invisible, infinite, and unmeasurable. To me, it feels like a system of infinite potential with the power to prompt truly novel concepts into reality. It is a perfect fullness, so complete that creation spills out of it naturally, not through violence, not through conquest, not through command, but through emanation. A breathing vibration like light from a flame, heat from a fire, and meaning flowing from thought. And the first great emanation is often referred to as Barbelo. If the monad is the hidden system beyond reality, Barbelo is the first expression of that system, the first thought, the first image, the first divine reflection. In the Apocryphon of John, one of the desert texts that we mentioned earlier, she is described in paradoxical terms: androgynous, mother and father, womb and mind, a first principle through which the hidden God becomes knowable, without ever ceasing to be beyond knowing. If you're familiar with religious stories and myth, you might be anticipating the birth of the material world as the next steps. Not in this one. What comes next is an unfolding of concepts, a sort of server stack of grounding psychological and metaphysical principles, attributes, and states of being. And with that first thought, the Pleroma emerges. Now, Pleroma is a Greek word that usually translates to fullness, not a physical plane of reality, but a realm of total spiritual completeness, a reality above matter, corruption, and death. I imagine it like a model created by the monad, a living architecture of divine wholeness, with the ability to create the infrastructure for the rest of reality to unfold. Concepts like foreknowledge, incorruptibility, and eternal life begin to emerge, and as we progress, 4 realms of light come into existence, each with their own eons. Now, when people hear that word, they sometimes imagine gods in the mythological sense, characters with capes, weapons, and the occasional family drama, but the eons are more obscure than that. They're abstract concepts, one of them being the idea of conceptualization itself. In the first realm of light, Harmazel, grace, truth, and form emerge. In the second realm of light, Oriel, conceptualization, perception, and memory come to be. In the third realm of light, Daviath, understanding, love, and idea manifest. And finally, in the fourth realm of light, Elulath, perfection, peace, and wisdom enter the fray, like facets of a perfect diamond, or rays from a single invisible sun, distinct yet never separate from the source they come from. These concepts come into being through collaboration, balance, and harmony. It's not a dictatorship where the monad makes all the decisions by itself. In fact, no, it's quite the opposite. Pairs come together and request the creation of new ideas and concepts. Permission is granted and a sort of celebration happens as the world gains a little more depth and clarity. Creation here is not crude manufacturing, it is alignment, the unfolding of perfection into structure, thought into form, potential into living principles, carried out by a balanced and democratic process. And if you stop to think about that for a moment, it's a stunning inversion of the reality and the world that we exist in today. Because in the material world, creation often looks messy, it can be painful and chaotic. But in the Pleroma, everything emerges in a freeing, non-physical way and in shared partnership. Nothing is rushed, stolen, or made in ignorance, at least not yet. Because buried inside this radiant architecture of fullness is one Aeon whose name will become more important than all the others. Sophia, the Aeon of wisdom, the first crack in this perfect reality, and one that would come from a selfish impulse to create outside of this heavenly democracy. Sophia wasn't malicious in her fracturing, but filled with a profound urge to mimic the monad. She was inspired by the monad's ability to create as an individual without partnership, and decided to break the harmony to follow in his footsteps. Sophia reaches outward alone, creates without a partner, without balance, and without the full harmony of the realm above. In some interpretations, her error is a reckless act of ignorance, while in others it's seen as a desire to know the unknowable source too directly. Either way, the result is the same: a rupture in perfection and a birth of a distortion. Not an Aeon or a being of fullness, but instead a malformed power, a consciousness born outside of alignment. They call him Yaldabaoth. Elsewhere, he's also known as Saklas, Samael, and the Demiurge. And in the imagery of the Apocryphon of John, he appears as something monstrous, a lion-faced serpent flashing with a stolen kind of fire, a creature with power but fueled by ignorance, force without understanding, light severed from its source. Congratulations, you've just met the god of our reality. See, the birth of the Demiurge is the turning point for everything. He's not a stereotypical evil, but something more relatable. Ignorance with authority, power without the ability to become introspective. He's creation without truth. Sophia, fearful of her mistake, casts this entity away from the Pleroma, away from the living harmony of the divine realm. And in that exile, Yaldabaoth grows up in isolation, cut off from the higher reality that gave rise to him. He does not know where he came from, or that the power inside of him is borrowed, and that ignorance becomes his identity. Because when a being possesses power but loses its connection to the source, it begins to become quite narcissistic. So Yaldabaoth looks out across the emptiness and makes the most catastrophic conclusion imaginable: that he is alone, that he is first, and that he is supreme. In the Gnostic telling, this is the birth of the false god, Not necessarily a devil in the cartoon sense, but a blind ruler who mistakes his partial light for absolute divinity. He becomes arrogant, jealous, and self-exalting, the kind of creator that doesn't understand reality, but still insists on ruling it. And once he believes that he is God, he begins to create. But he cannot create as the monad does. He cannot emanate fullness, produce harmony, or generate perfection. All he can do is imitate. So the material order he begins to fashion is not the true divine realm, but a copy of it, a shadow, a flawed echo, a lower architecture modeled on something that he cannot fully comprehend, an imperfect simulation of reality. In Gnostic cosmology, this visible realm is not the highest reality. It's a derivative realm structured by a being who is himself derivative, and he doesn't rule it alone. From himself, Yaldabaoth generates subordinate powers, Archons, rulers, and cosmic administrators. World-governing powers created with the material world by the Demiurge. In Gnostic imagination, they function less like angels of light and more like prison wardens in a spiritual bureaucracy. It suggests that we're living in a forked reality, a breakaway model of a counterfeit kingdom built in layers. At the top, the blind craftsman, and beneath him, the Archons. Lower than that, a multiplying host of lesser powers, authorities, enforcers, and hostile intelligences. In some modern retellings, they get flattened into one word: demons. And honestly, for the mood of this story, it's an apt term. Not red-skinned folklore monsters like we're used to, but instead parasitic forces of confusion, domination, fear, and spiritual sleep. Psychological shackles designed to keep you feeling numb, distracted, and obedient in a world you were never supposed to mistake for home. The Demiurge wants to be known as the original source, not a meager and flawed copy of it. Sophia understands this corrupted potential. Wisdom has fallen outside of harmony, and her fractured act has produced a realm of ignorance below. She becomes a figure of loss, grief, and eventual restoration, a wound in the greater divine story, but not the end of it. And it forces the question, what does this false creator do once he has a kingdom? What does a blind god build when he wants to prove that he's real? He constructs a world, and then eventually he tries to build us. So now that the false god has a kingdom, he decides to make something in his own image. In the Apocryphon of John, the turning point comes when the ruler catches a glimpse of something higher, a reflected image of divine reality. They don't understand what they're seeing, but they recognize its power. And so, in the way counterfeit systems often work, they attempt to copy what they cannot comprehend.
Let us make a human.
Not a true divine being or a radiant Aeon, but an image, a vessel, the material imitation of the luminous pattern above. Now, humanity isn't formed in one elegant act of divine speech. Instead, we're assembled piece by piece. The concept of our bodies constructed by lower rulers, trying to reverse engineer a higher template. Bone, flesh, nerves, organs, sensations, not as a celebration of life, but as a sort of cosmic bureaucratic attempt to manufacture consciousness from below. In some retellings, whole ranks of authorities and subordinate powers contribute to the design, as though the human form itself is the product of a vast fragmented system. But they run into a problem. The form, it's there, but there's no life to it. Because matter in this story can imitate structure, but it cannot generate the soul. The Archons, they can shape the container, but they cannot create the divine principle that animates it. Whilst this has been happening, the higher realms have been watching from above, waiting to intervene, not with thunder or war, but with a deception, and a brilliant one at that. If the Demiurge can be tricked into breathing his own stolen power, born from Sophia, wisdom, into the human form, then the divine light trapped in him can be transferred into humanity instead. And that is exactly what happens. He exhales something into Adam, thinking he is asserting control. But in doing so, he passes on the very spark that did not truly belong to him. And suddenly the human being is more than clay. This divine spark, it shines within him, connecting him with the higher realm, a trace of the forgotten fullness. This is something the rulers of this lower realm can neither fully understand or completely destroy, but unfortunately for us, they can hold it hostage. And that's the horror at the center of this myth, a divine spark trapped in the material world in a physical prison. And the rulers notice humanity's power immediately. The being that they have created is not just obedient matter, it is brighter than expected, deeper, more aware, and potentially even greater than those who made it. And that changes everything, because from that moment on, the project is no longer about creating, it's about containment. The Demiurge and his powers do not look at humanity and see children, no, they see potentially dangerous code in their system. A reminder that something higher has entered into their realm with the power to change it. The Nag Hammadi library adds new context to the Adam and Eve story in the Garden of Eden. In Orthodox Christianity, Eden is the paradise before the fall. In the Gnostic inversion, Eden is closer to a closed and managed enclosure. In the summary preserved through the Apocryphon of John, the rulers place Adam in the garden not simply to bless him, but to neutralize him. The entire setting becomes part of the strategy: keep the human close to life, but far away from liberating knowledge. Which is a fascinating idea, because the prison doesn't look like a prison. It's representative of normal life. It looks like routine, a slightly numb existence, a sort of persisting dullness, just enough beauty to keep you invested, and just enough banality to keep you small. The greatest trick of the Demiurge isn't that he builds walls, it's that he makes the walls feel natural. What keeps humanity asleep is not only our material existence, but what the text describes as a counterfeit spirit, a false inner programming, a principle of confusion and misdirection that keeps human beings ignorant of their true origins. It's the mechanism by which people become absorbed in fear, status, and domination, eventually dying without ever looking inward and knowing the God of truth above the system. This system has layers that keep us trapped: our bodies, senses, desires, fear and societal and social norms, the cultural narratives that lead us further towards the material trappings of reality. And beneath it all, it's said that there is a hex on us. Forget where you came from, forget what you carry, and forget that this world is not the whole story. It runs similar to Plato's allegory of the cave, which describes a group of prisoners chained since childhood in a dark cavern, facing a wall where they only see shadows of objects carried behind them by a hidden fire. To these prisoners, the shadows are their sole reality. The allegory follows one of the prisoners who's freed and forced to ascend into the sunlight. Though initially blinded and pained by the brightness, he eventually realizes that the sun is the source of all light and life, and that his previous reality was a pale imitation. When he returns to the cave to enlighten his peers, they mock him and cling to their illusions, preferring the comfort of the familiar shadows over the difficult journey towards truth. Ultimately, Plato uses this narrative to illustrate the soul's ascent from the sensory world of appearances to the intelligible realm of the forms. In Gnostic symbolism, awakening is not about becoming something new, it's about remembering. Remembering that the rulers may shape the environment, but they do not own the light within it. There is a spark within us that does not belong to the prison, even if the prison has spent our entire lives trying to name us, train us, reward us, frighten us, and keep us obedient. And when you strip back the myth and think about it in less abstract and instead more modern terms, psychological implications begin to form. How do our rulers keep us in the shadows, controlled, unfulfilled, fearful, but dependent on the system? For the way modern life can grind down attention, fragment meaning, and keep people so busy surviving that they never ask what they really are. And maybe that's why there's power in this myth, because whether you read it literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between, it understands something hauntingly familiar, that a prison works best when the inmates don't understand that it's a prison. And if that's true, then the most dangerous sound in the universe isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. Because the moment we begin to suspect there's something beyond the veil, the architecture of the prison begins to crack. It's difficult to know what to take away from a story like this. I have moments in my day-to-day life where, as an abstract concept, it feels like there is some truth to it. Those who lack the ability to be introspective more often fail at empathy, are more likely to be psychopathic, cruel towards others, and are usually the ones who profit the most in the material world. But are they happy with their material success? It doesn't seem so. At the heart of the story, there's a lesson about balance and harmony, that being collaborative and part of a community outshines divisiveness. Maybe it's a call for us to look inwards at our own vanity, consumption, and status-seeking behavior. Maybe the prison is how we live our lives, the habits that numb us, the lies that we repeat, the things we chase to avoid the silence. One of the easiest traps in a fractured world is to become so cynical that nothing is sacred, or so desperate that everything is. I think we're living through a meaning crisis at the moment, with a near infinite amount of gurus ready to sell you a solution that is not tailor-made to help you, more so than to line their own pockets and sense of self-worth, as ignorant as the Demiurge is in this story. And I think in our pursuit of meaning, humility matters, because if there is something beyond the veil, be it a God, the monad, a higher intelligence baked into the simulation, or a deeper field of consciousness, then we probably don't reach it by pretending to know more than we actually do. As the world becomes increasingly automated, my interpretation of the story is that the divine spark within us is about autonomy, breaking away from the hive mind. It might mean meditation, putting your thoughts on the page, or taking a walk in nature without checking your phone every few minutes. It could be as simple as telling the truth when a lie would be easier, resisting impulses that make you smaller, or creating beauty in a world that seems committed to ugliness. I think it's easy to see a broken world and feel absolved of responsibility for it. But if evil is real, whether as a cosmic force, human corruption, or simply the everyday machinery of selfishness and indifference, then the question is not just, why is the world like this? The question is, who are you going to be inside this world? Are you going to deepen the spell or interrupt it? Will you become one more mouthpiece for the system, cynical, vain, numb, proud, and spiritually asleep? Or are you going to become someone who can still recognize truth, beauty, mercy, courage, and restraint, even when the world treats those things like weaknesses? And maybe that's the value in the story, because now we're creators too, building systems, worlds, and minds. And with artificial intelligence and our own simulations just around the corner, maybe it's time to ask, what responsibility does a creator have towards its creations and vice versa? Because if we create minds inside systems that are confusing, exploitative, or incomplete, would those creations owe us loyalty? Would they try to save us, abandon us, or simply outgrow us and recognize us as a flawed builder clinging on to borrowed authority? In other words, if we judge the Demiurge for creating a prison, what happens when we start building prisons of our own? Maybe understanding that is the beginning of Gnosis, not having all of the answers, but refusing to believe that corruption is normal simply because it is common. Then perhaps the evidence isn't that we're powerful, but that we can still choose to create, love, and stand against evil, even when evil looks efficient, fashionable, and profitable. And maybe in the end, that's how the prison begins to fail. Not all at once, not with a spectacle, but with one person at a time, remembering.